I, as a financial advisor who has done countless retirement plans throughout the year, think that Gen X, people born between 1965 and 1980, are going to have a particularly hard time in retirement? Stay with me. As a financial advisor, I have done countless retirement plans over the past decade. And one trend that I have recognized is that people in a specific age bracket, and this is Gen X, people born between 1965 and 1980, are going to have a particularly hard time retiring in America. There are certain trends that have lined up, and there are certain factors that are unique to Generation X in planning out their retirement. So let's talk about some of those factors. So most of our parents, if we're Generation X, are baby boomers. There's a few of us, including myself, whose parents are in the silent generation, but our parents are either retiring or have long since retired. And one thing that I will admit in watching my parents go through retirement, before I became a financial advisor, I really didn't pay that much attention to how they made retirement happen. Now, after I became a financial advisor and as I began working with my parents as they aged more with their finances, I realized how they've been able to pull off a successful retirement. And many of the factors that they had working in their favor are not factors that Gen X, millennials, Gen Z can rely on. It's going to hit Gen X the hardest because Gen X is basically next in line for retirement. And over the next 20 years, you're going to see millions of Gen X starting the pathway of retirement. What are those factors that baby boomers and the silent generation had that Gen X doesn't have? First, for baby boomers, the average 401k IRA retirement account balance is about $272,000. Now, that doesn't necessarily take into account other accounts that the individual may have and home equity and individual brokerage accounts and things like that. But that's just looking at retirement accounts. A lot of baby boomer and silent generation people are still married. Of course, you have some people who divorced or some people who are widowed, but a large cohort in that generation got married, stayed married, or if they did divorce, remarried to a second spouse. So they have the power of two in planning their retirement. And that makes things so much easier to have two people working together for the goal of retirement. So that's one thing that the baby boomers have in their favor. Another thing that baby boomers and silent generation have access to that other generations cannot count on are pensions. About 50% of baby boomers, silent generation have access to pensions. So that means either the husband or the wife has pensions. In some lucky scenarios, you have two people who have pensions, but they work for a company for a number of years and were able to secure that pension for their retirement. And now they're using that pension to live off of in retirement. Also, with being married and the power of two, they have two Social Security incomes. Also, a lot of the Social Security rules are in favor of married couples, where one spouse can draw based on the other spouse's earnings and situations like that. I do believe that situations where you can draw based on your spouse's earnings are in their final years. I do think sometime in the next 5 to 10 years, they're going to eliminate that provision of Social Security. But while that provision is in place for the baby boomers and silent generations, it has helped a lot of couples retire and retire comfortably. I would say in my work as a financial advisor, and I know my work as a financial advisor is unique because I'm typically dealing with higher income individuals with better financial situations, but probably 40% of the people who I do retirement planning for in the baby boomer silent generation era, they don't even have to touch the $272,000 that's in their IRA or their 401k. They have more than enough money to live off of from their pensions or pensions, their social securities or social securities with an S. And sometimes they have a little bit of money from a brokerage account or a savings account. A lot of times that IRA or 401k never ends up getting touched or is used as a backup emergency account and ends up going to the next generation. Now, let's fast forward to Generation X. These are often the children of the silent generation and the baby boomers. And I'm technically Generation X myself. I'm right on the border between millennial and Gen X. So I'm a very young Gen X, but an old millennial. And a lot has changed. And I think the reason why Gen X is really going to struggle with retirement is because the game changed when they were younger. When we were in our 20s and 30s, the times where most people are not paying attention to retirement in any significant way, the game changed, right? And we didn't have enough time to really change up our behavior to match what was happening in the overall broader economic situation to really plan for the changes that were coming through. Things like pensions were basically becoming non-existent and companies were rapidly switching to 401k. Many Gen X are divorced or never married. So instead of the power of two in planning for retirement, you only have a plan for one. The average age that a baby boomer started saving for retirement is 35. The average age that someone who is Gen X started saving for retirement is age 30. So we came into the game earlier than our parents, but probably too late to make up for many of these factors that made a baby boomer silent generation retirement comfortable, to recognize that it's not going to be broadly applicable to us as Gen X and we need to make provision. We started saving at age 30, which is probably a little bit too late. And many people who are Gen X are finding that they're going to be in a bind for retirement. I see it a lot in my office. And there are certain things that you can do if you are part of Gen X and you are in this generation of change and retirement to make sure that you have the retirement that you want to live. Now, it's easier if you're a younger Gen Xer, older millennial, because you have more time to make up for the difference, versus you're right on the threshold of retirement. You're already 60, decisions have been made. There's just not enough time to make changes if you were born in 1965 or 1966. But these are some things that you may want to consider as a Gen Xer to basically put yourself in a better position for retirement. If you are considering retirement at this point, just know you're not going to have the same deal that your parents, the baby boomers or the silent generation has, and retirement is going to look very different for you. So the first thing I would tell someone who is Gen X, and I have this conversation a lot with Gen Xers, is finding a way to extend careers. I'm hearing it a lot nowadays. Companies are laying people off, and ageism still is very rampant in American society and the American workforce. I recently talked to someone who was in their early 60s and laid off. They're going to have a really hard time finding work. Even in fields like technology, ageism can start as early as mid 40s, where people are suddenly pushed out of careers and they have a hard time replicating the income that they had in these technology careers. Just the overall what's going on in the American economy, I'm talking to more and more clients who are being laid off. I typically have a conversation with people in their early to mid 40s, depending on the field that they're in, about their plan for their career and what are plans to extend their career. This may be doing a sideline, having a small business, doing something that you personally control and is not at the whims of a corporation or a broader business, where you can bring in income and you can extend your career. Now, this may be a sideline or a small business and maybe bringing in a few extra bucks, but it's also something potentially that you can expand and maybe make from your sideline to your main line. You may have to exit the workplace at a very inconvenient time in your mid 50s or early 60s, and you may not be able to re-enter. At least you can bring in some income and control the terms on which you worked and how long that you work. Now, it takes years to build up a small business or a sideline. And I'm a big fan of packing the parachute while the plane is on the ground, of developing a sideline, a small business while you already have a job, a process that's more accessible and easy for you versus you have no other income. You are 100% dependent on this income and you need to make this business viable. That puts a lot of pressure on people, and a lot of people can't do that. But if you have 3 to 5 years to build up a business, you have a second income. And when the shoe drops, you're laid off, the company goes through restructuring and you're let go, you could at least replace some of your income from the small business that you have. and hopefully in time replace the majority of your income from the business, and it can become, instead of a sideline, your main line. If you don't have time, which for many Gen Xers, you don't have time, you're in 10 years before retirement, you're in the 5 years before retirement, the only thing you can really make up with is money, putting away more money. The good news is that by the time you reach your 50s, you're probably in your highest earning years. And what I suggest is for people who get promotions or pay increases during this decade of life, a lot of it, if not all of it, goes towards retirement savings. You're basically keeping your lifestyle at a baseline, you're paying your bills, you're taking care of business, but you're not seeing massive jumps in your lifestyle at this point. By the time you are in your 50s, you should be close to, if not maxing out your retirement savings. And 24,000, or you get to save more if you're over 50. It's like closer to 30,000 a year in retirement savings. I understand there's some ifs, ands, or buts with that. This may be for people who are only high income. That's totally fine. But you need to be doing more in terms of saving more money versus trying to increase your lifestyle at this point. If you have reached your 50s and you find that your retirement is underfunded and you're planning to retire by the time you are in your early or mid 60s. So forego lifestyle expectations increase, put that money into either an investment brokerage account or into a 401k IRA account to max out your retirement savings. This is an important one, checking your Social Security at least yearly. A lot of people don't pay attention to Social Security until they get into a clutch moment, meaning they are 62, getting ready to retire, and suddenly they want to look at their Social Security. They're decades too late. I recommend looking at your Social Security statement annually because the Social Security Bureau does make mistakes. They get the information from the IRS, but not all information translates over. You need to have a records earnings of your prior earnings and prior tax filings and make sure it matches what's on your Social Security statement. You need to see that Social Security amount going up each and every year that you work. And you need to have an estimate decades before you retire of what you will get from Social Security. Know that Social Security is not an exact science. What you will likely be getting at retirement is not the same as what on that sheet. There has been some changes with the recent tax law at the federal level, but in terms of taxation, your state may tax Social Security still. You also have to pay Medicare and for medical expenses out of your Social Security. So what you see when you open up that statement isn't necessarily what you will be getting, but it's important that you check that statement annually, starting at about age 40 and going forward from there. Next, I really strongly suggest that you do consolidate old 401ks and IRAs. Well, until recently, it's been a bit of a hassle to consolidate old 401ks and IRAs. It's recently gotten easier, but I would suggest take a day and go through, make a list of old 401ks and IRAs, start making phone calls to companies that are holders of your 401k and IRA, and start consolidating those. Why? If you don't consolidate them, people do forget about them. I have had cases where clients have forgotten about old 401ks and IRAs, and it's created a tax problem for them in the future. And it's time to start thinking holistically about your assets that you have saved for retirement. And one of the first steps is consolidating old 401ks and IRAs. If you have old 401ks and IRAs, close out those accounts that you are not using or will never use again. Consolidate them into your current 401k or IRA account and have an accurate accounting of what you have saved for retirement. The final question for Gen X, and this is an important question, is can you find a way to live on less? Some of us live in large major urban areas like New York City or San Francisco or LA, or these places are wonderful, but they are incredibly expensive. Maybe a retirement in Manhattan will not work for you, but a retirement in a much lower cost of living area of the nation will work for you. There is some cost differentials between parts of the United States. They used to be very stark prior to COVID. I don't think the cost differentials in different parts of the United States are as grand as they were before. Basically, everywhere in the US is becoming more expensive. People do talk to me about possibilities of living abroad in retirement. That's becoming more and more of a challenged prospect because a lot of foreign countries are getting tired of the influx of Americans coming over for either retirement or remote work visas or this or that, and they're starting to close their doors to Americans. Essentially, we map it out. So, what would retirement look like if they did retire in America, or what would retirement look like if they were able to retire somewhere else? But basically, can you pull off a retirement in a more affordable cost of living area of the nation and live a good life? That may be a possibility for Gen X. But Gen X, we're facing a lot of headwinds. Pensions are basically non-existent in our generation. We've lost the power of two because many of us are going into retirement solo. And many of us started retirement savings a little bit later than we should have at age 30. The interesting thing is that millennials started saving for retirement at age 26. Pensions were long gone when they came on the scene. They fully understand that they're likely going to have to do this all by themselves. And many of them don't even believe in the concept of Social Security that's going to be available when millennials, Gen Zs hit retirement. So the good thing is that the word has gotten out that retirement is going to be more of a self-funded, do-it-yourself sort of project. Millennials are getting like a decade head start over baby boomers. But unfortunately, I think Gen X is just caught in the crosshairs of all of this. We didn't get the message soon enough to really effectively change course. It took about 20 years for this message that pensions are basically gone to filter through society and for people to start making course corrections to their retirement plan. So there you have it. Tell me what you like, tell me what you don't like. Tell me why and if you think Gen X are going to be screwed for retirement. If you found this information useful, please share and subscribe. Thank you.